Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us in this afternoon. I'm Katia Vale, Schools and Exams Marketing Manager, and I'm talking to you from our office here in São Paulo. Please use the chat box and tell us where you are joining from. We would like to hear from you. I see Lucas has already sent a hello, Aline, oh, Jundiaí here, great, Belo Horizonte, Niterói, Uberlândia, Curitiba, great. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have the pleasure of having author Herbert with us on the topic of making language memorable. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Herbert will be delivering his talk and we will have time for questions at the end. Please send your questions via the Q&A tool we have here in Zoom. By the end of the session, we will send in the chat box a link for feedback, and from this link, you will be able to download your certificate. Hello, Bia. Great to have you all here. Herbert, are you there?
Yes, I am actually. I need to switch my video on. Thanks so much, Katia.
Great. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure for us to have you here. And with no further ado, I will hand over to you, Herbert.
Thank you so much, Katia. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I almost said good evening. Because I'm actually talking from my study here in Austria, where it is just 3 minutes after 8 p.m. and it's pitch dark out there. This is the time of the year when the sun actually goes down pretty early and it's night out there. Nevertheless, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us. It's good to have you with us. And let's get started straight away. We are all in the memory business, I believe, as teachers, as coordinators, as teacher trainers, my team and I as material writers. And this is what this session today is going to be about. How can we make language even more memorable for our students? And what can we as ELT teachers or coordinators, trainers, what have you, material writers, what can we actually learn from what is called the new science of learning? I have a question for you. When you think about your students and how they are learning and how you are trying to help them with their learning on a daily basis, how you considering what you could do to help them learn better and make them remember better, what would you consider your own most important insight or insights into learning? What is most important when it comes to learning? Could you just type in a few words maybe here? Alberto, thanks for liking my background here. I like your comment. Okay, emotions, excellent. Thank you, Adriano. Motivation, Diana. Willingness, absolutely, yes. That is so key, isn't it? Association, so helping them to make connections between their prior knowledge and what they are learning now. That is a key point that helps to remember and is essential when it comes to getting them to remember new content. Absolutely. Anything else you would like to share with us? Meaningfulness, so important, because meaningfulness has to do with relevance and also, of course, interest and creativity do. Absolutely. Thank you. Emotions again, so important, Daniela. Hi, Daniela. Yes, so let's have a look at what we're going to be dealing with in this session today. We'll start out by talking about the role of knowledge in language learning. We'll then look at some of the insights, the very relevant insights from what is called the new science of learning. I'll be talking about one key area which I regard as one of the key insights, and that is study versus retrieval practice. So how can we help our students to go more towards retrieval practice rather than studying? I will explain what I mean by that. And we will look at evidence from neuroscience on how to make language memorable for our students. And finally, we'll look at a range of practical suggestions as to what we can do for implementing such an approach in school, in our classrooms. And I will be sharing, I'm very excited, as you can imagine, about the second edition of Think that my co-authors and I have produced, and Cambridge has actually turned into such a beautiful book. You might have seen it already. This is not a session on promoting Think as such. It's not a product presentation, but I will show you a few examples in order to exemplify what I'm talking about theoretically. So the role of knowledge in language learning. Well, some people with the kind of development of the digital world, some people have said, and quite a lot of people have said this, well, we can look everything up. So is knowledge really still so important? We have like this girl here in this photo, we have knowledge at our fingertips. We can basically, as long as we are connected to the World Wide Web, we can check everything out on the web. So what is the role of emotions? And of course, the young people we teach, the teenagers we have in our classrooms, they are so familiar with checking out information on the web. So Pedro de Bruycker says provocatively, do we really need to teach anymore? Do learners really need to acquire factual knowledge? And doesn't the present generation of digital natives already possess these skills? Well, it's true. It's a digital world. And they do have information readily available. But of course, they also have mountains of garbage readily available, and they need to learn to search in an intelligent way. They need to learn to sort out the garbage from the valuable information. They also need to learn to differentiate between fact and fake news. So the question is, what kind of role does knowledge play in this process? Well, according to Pedro de Bruycker, a very, very important role, okay? So he says, do we really need to teach anymore? Yes. Do learners really need to acquire factual knowledge? Yes. And a definite and clear no to the question whether the present generation of digital natives already possesses these skills. And he explains and says, indeed, much, if not all of the knowledge that we want children and young adults to learn in school is to be found on the web. However, what we already know determines what we see and understand, and not the other way round. Let me share with you a visual metaphor. This is a photo taken at a car park in York. It's the St. Leonard's Place car park. It's more or less in the city center. And when you drive into this car park, or when you go to get your car from the car park, this is the kind of information you see. And as we can see here, it's actually quite a lot of information, isn't it? It's information about opening hours, about prices. It's information about their code of conduct. It's information about different places in the city. There's a map also. There's different phone numbers, etc., etc. Now, the problem is, if I need some information, and this compared, the amount of information in this image compared to the amount of information we have out there on the web is actually very limited. And yet, if I need some specific information and I start reading the first poster and I read it word for word, and then I go to the next poster, read that word for word, and so on, I will actually be lost. So in de Bruycker's words, research has shown that low prior knowledge negatively influences the search process. Students with more prior knowledge have an advantage because they can easily link that knowledge to the task requirements and to information found on the web. In other words, the more knowledge our students have available, the better and more efficient they will be at searching for the right information. Now, what is the role of knowledge in learning a language? That's the next key point here. Can we again have a few answers from you, please? So what is the role of knowledge in learning a language? Well, you could say it's a very important one, obviously, but where is knowledge particularly important? Which areas of language learning? Associations, Katja, okay. Repertoire, vocabulary, absolutely. A facilitator for understanding, very much in line with what I just quoted from de Bruycker. Memory, obviously, cognates, absolutely. Background, so the context. For example, when you think of textual information, becoming a global citizen, absolutely impossible without having general knowledge and specific knowledge too. Comprehension, yes. It promotes a more cultural process of learning. Okay, thank you, Rodrigo. Absolutely. Well, let's have a look at what knowledge will allow students to develop our skills. Absolutely. Let's have a look at what Anderson and others say. They say, in principle, there are 4 different types of knowledge. This is not related yet to ELT. Factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. And we can, of course, easily link that with what you have said and what we do in our classrooms every day. Factual, that is about the lexicon, as somebody said. That is about words, vocabulary. That is about irregular verb forms and what have you. Conceptual is about the understanding of linguistic concepts. So when we think about an understanding of the difference between, I don't know, the present perfect progressive and the present perfect simple, that's where I need conceptual insights, where I need to notice differences in the language concepts in order to apply those concepts successfully. Then procedural, and that relates to what some of you said. Claudia said comprehension. If I scroll a bit further up, somebody said a facilitator for understanding. So obviously reading and writing, and then of course speaking, listening. So procedural is about having knowledge of skills, strategies, basically. And last but not least, metacognition. Knowledge about how we think, knowledge about how we can use certain strategies successfully, and how we can improve the how of our learning. But of course, metacognition also has to do with what a few of you said about becoming a global citizen, where metacognition, understanding otherness, for example, and learning to understand that other people are different from how we are, other cultures might be different from our own culture, but they're still people. These insights require metacognition, and of course, as somebody said also, memory requires metacognition to a certain extent also. So let's now turn towards this big thing, the new science of learning. What is it actually? Okay, so why new science of learning, and what is it? So this is a very recent quotation from a book. I happen to have it here on my desk. It's called The Science of Learning. It's 2021 publication. And it's an excellent book. 99 studies that every teacher needs to know. It's not about language learning, it's about learning in general, but very applicable also to language learning. So the authors say here, and I have put this quotation here, what's the science of learning? It's the quest to help our students learn more effectively and efficiently. Despite there being a wealth of research into the science of learning, to date, much of it has failed to get into the hands of the people who need it the most, that is, teachers. So this is up-to-date, cutting-edge research, and it's really worth being looked at, and I believe also being taken on board. So let's go into this a little bit. And this is a photograph that so reminds me of a holiday I spent in British Columbia, so Vancouver and further north, many moons ago. These are the places where salmon comes back from the Pacific, and salmon swim upstream to actually spawn. The spawning grounds are the places where they were actually born, so to speak. So salmon comes back and they spawn and then they die, and many of them are actually eaten up by bears and eagles, bald eagles, as they swim upstream. It's quite a dramatic and beautiful experience to watch salmon there. But why am I quoting this? Well, Terry Doyle says, the new science of learning is all about helping students to stop swimming upstream in their learning. Swimming upstream is not easy. Swimming upstream is not what we want our students to do when it comes to learning. We want them to get into a flow. We want them to enjoy their learning, and we want them to feel that they can learn with ease to a certain extent, which doesn't mean that learning is always just fun and easy. but learning, students can get into a flow when it comes to learning. So Doyle and Zakrajsek, in the book, The New Science of Learning, How to Learn in Harmony with Your Brain, say new insights into how the human brain learns, make it clear that many of the learning practices used in the past and that students continue to use are highly inefficient, ineffective, or just plain wrong. Better learning doesn't always require more effort or more time. Rather, one needs only effectively align how the brain naturally learns with the demands of the classroom. So this basically underlines what Terry Doyle says in the previous quotation, that students often do something that can be compared to swimming upstream, okay? And it's of course important for us also as teachers to know how we learn, because if we don't know how we learn, then how should we know how to teach? That's what Raphael Reif actually says, the president of MIT. So there are 4 pillars of learning. And I'm sure when you look at these 4 pillars of learning, that you will be nodding your heads. This is not something that you don't know already, or you're not coming across basically every day in your classrooms, but it's worth pointing these out. So this is a pretty recent study by Diane, 2018. And so the 4 pillars are attention. When we pay attention, and please mark my words here, paying attention is an interesting metaphor. This somehow amplifies the information that we focus on. We notice that when we see something and we start paying attention to that, then all of a sudden it seems like we're developing a tunnel vision. We see that thing or that person or that movement or what have you, that information, and everything else seems to be grayed out or blurry in many ways. The second one is curiosity. I think that's something that was mentioned several times previously. Also, emotions was mentioned by you, which is all about active engagement, encourages the brain to constantly test out new hypotheses. Error feedback, because it helps us correct our models of the world and correct our models of the language, of course. And last but not least, consolidation. And here, the latest research shows how important sleep is. Mark my words here. We'll put a pin here in this point number 4. I will come back to it. This is actually one of the reasons why this new science of learning, I think, is so absolutely important. A bit of food for thought here. Paying attention, that's an interesting metaphor. That is, I have to give something in order to get something, isn't it? It's a commercial metaphor in many, many ways. Well, our students have to give something in order to get something. In order to learn, I have to pay attention. I have to give up many things I would love to do. I would like to sit in the classroom and look at my mobile phone, maybe, if I'm a student. Or I would like to have a chat with the girls next to me. I'd like to flirt a bit with those girls in the classroom, but I can't. If I want to take something home from the lesson, not the fun, if I want to learn, I have to pay attention, okay? And this is also what Steven Pinker says, and this is a quotation that comes from his book, How the Mind Works. He says, in an optimally designed information retrieval system, such as the brain, of course, an information retrieval system, an item should be recovered only when the relevance of the item outweighs the cost of retrieving it. In other words, our students will not pay attention if what they are learning is not seen as relevant by them. And this is where I think several of you actually said relevance, interest is extremely important in order to learn successfully. The second point here, when we look at this dancer, this is about engagement, isn't it? And we know that, like this girl here in this image, when young people are engaged in something, it doesn't matter that it costs a lot of time, or it costs energy, or they need to work hard in order to achieve something in that area. If they are emotionally engaged and cognitively engaged, then they will be successful in whatever it is they want to be successful in. However, and this is a bit of food for thought, there could also be downsides to engagement if engagement is not seen in the right way. What do I mean by that? Well, Karl Piaf says, just because they're busy doesn't mean they're learning anything. So it's not about being busy. Engagement is not just about being active in some ways. Engagement needs to go deeper. Engagement needs to connect, metaphorically speaking, the brain with the heart. It needs to connect cognition with emotions. Only then we will do what Karl Piaf says here. We will learn, and learning will happen because we are thinking hard. Now, this is one of my most favorite sculptures, The Thinker, okay? This beautiful sculpture that I saw actually several times in Paris in a museum. When we are really engaged, when we're learning successfully, we have to think hard. Having fun is not enough. Being active is not enough. It requires full cognitive and emotional engagement. Point number 3, food for thought. We are more effective. That's one of the things that this new science of learning has come up with. When we do testing rather than studying. This may be a little bit surprising, and I will explain a bit further in a few minutes. Testing should come first, and then subsequently to that should come study, is more effective than studying something in a focused way before we have a test. And I will show you what I mean by that in a moment, okay? This is an interesting study and an interesting quotation from Manu Kuiper, who says in this article, examining productive failure, productive success, unproductive failure, and unproductive success in learning. He says productive failure engages students in solving problems requiring concepts they have yet to learn, followed by consolidation and instruction on the targeted concepts. I will explain in a minute. By failure, I simply mean that students will typically not be able to generate or discover the correct solutions by themselves. However, to the extent that students are able to use their prior knowledge to generate suboptimal or even incorrect solutions to the problem, the process can be productive in preparing them to learn better from the instruction that follows. So let me go a little bit deeper than what I've already said. What I have said is, rather than getting them to study and then testing them, Research suggests that a promising way would be doing a test, getting them to do a test, and then the teacher showing them the solutions, then the teacher explaining, then they study based on the experiences they've just made, and we go and test again. And of course, I'm not talking about testing that is used to grade them or give them marks. I'm talking about testing that helps them to learn, okay? Last point here, the bulk of the evidence suggests that the sleeping brain does not absorb new information. It can only replay what it has already experienced. To learn a skill as complex as a new language, the only thing that works is practice during the day, then sleep during the night to reactivate and consolidate what we require. Give me a few more minutes. It'll all fall into place very soon. Now, let's look at what I said, study versus retrieval practice. This goes back to a study, a seminal meta-study, where Danilowski and his colleagues, a group of cognitive psychologists in 2013, looked at, I believe, 800 or 900 studies on learning. And they produced a meta-study. So they were interested in what are the most efficient study strategies? What are the most efficient ways of learning? Okay, and they came up with this publication, Improving Students' Learning with Effective Learning Techniques, Promising Directions from Cognitive and Educational Psychology. And the outcomes of their study are basically what has been confirmed many, many times in the meantime by what is called the new science of learning. And what are those outcomes of that huge meta study? They looked at the 10 most used study strategies by students. And they looked at all those strategies, for example, underlining, rereading, highlighting, using one of those highlighters, going through a text, etc., 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 sitting down and reading a list of words again and again and again and again and again. They also looked at practice testing or retrieval practice, and they looked at distributed practice. And the fascinating thing, and I happily confess, I would have never guessed this correctly. The fascinating thing is that the two most efficient and effective study strategies are actually practice testing or retrieval practice and distributed practice. Distributed practice means basically it's the opposite of what is called cramming. Cramming is, imagine you're telling your students there's a test on Friday, and several of your students, of course, will sit down Thursday late afternoon, and they will study into the night. They will cram as much as possible into a few hours in order to get good test results the next day. Well, the problem with cramming is it might be successful for them in terms of getting a good mark on that one test. But the problem is cramming does not lead to consolidated knowledge. In other words, what we cram into our brains gets forgotten very, very fast again. We've all, I think, made these experiences. Well, Daniela actually says cramming has never worked for me. Great, because that means that you use study strategies that were a lot more efficient and helped to consolidate. Many students do cram, and the research shows it's not very successful. Fascinating that when I think back to when I was a teacher at university, I think back to what my students did there. Underlining, highlighting, rereading were definitely the most frequently used study strategies, okay? And they have been found to be very, very inefficient, okay? I'm not, we don't have the time, I'm not going into elaborative interrogation and interleaved retrieval practice. The key point here is practice testing and retrieval practice. Let's look a little bit further into this, okay? So neuroscience basically confirms what I've just said, and I'm not going to go into all this into detail. I would just want to basically summarize what this slide says. The first one is that whenever we learn something, there's physical change in our brains through the formation of synapses and physical connections, so-called neuronal networks in our cortex. Our brain forms networks, which is all about new learning, okay? When we practice something, when we revise something, when we study something and we are fully engaged and we think hard, as I said previously, then the ability to recall information becomes faster, okay? So this is called long-term potentiation. Point number 3, the important message for all learners: meaningful connections, as somebody said at the beginning of this seminar. Meaningful connections between our prior knowledge, what we already know, and the new things we learn, and practice, okay? And the number 4 here, we need to study in order to form lasting memories. Cramming just does not work. To form lasting memories, we need to practice test, ideally, again and again and again and again, so that this is over a longer period of time and includes phases of good sleep. Here we come back to this sleep thing. Learning is much more efficient when done at regular intervals. Rather than cramming, we're better off spreading out the learning, spreading out over several days. The reason is simple. Every night, our brain consolidates what it's learned during the day. This is one of the most important neuroscience discoveries of the last 30 years. Sleep isn't just a period of inactivity, quite the contrary. While we sleep, our brain remains active. It runs a specific algorithm that replays the important events and information, I would like to add, it recorded during the previous day and gradually transfers them into a more efficient compartment of our memory. If a student does cramming only, this is exactly what's missing. And this is the reason why then information is not well connected and why information is actually not easily retrieved. In other words, it will be short-term retrievable, but not long-term retrievable. And that means we're talking about a kind of learning that does not really get the results that our students need. Okay, now let me drink a glass of water. Not a whole glass, it's a bit too big. And then we're going to have a look at a number of practical suggestions. And as I promised, we will have a look at a few examples from Think. So what we're talking about is a new paradigm of learning, basically. Teach, study, test, you get the results. This is what students have been doing for decades. We teach, they study, we test them, and then they get the results of the test. While the new paradigm would be teaching and challenging cognitively at the same time, involving them in information retrieval practice, study based on the feedback they get, and then they're making progress. And actually, this is a kind of visual representation here, but in fact, it should be a sort of circle. This is actually from a leaflet or a brochure published by Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Here you have the link if you want to download this. This is all on assessment for learning. So assessment that helps students with their learning. Now, how could we implement something? Well, or at a school level, it could be implemented. If several teachers get together and actually see this as part of their continued professional development. So what would it mean? Well, first of all, make yourselves familiar with the new science of learning, develop a professional library, get some journals, research papers, look out for good videos on the web. Discuss the findings, agree on objectives that everyone can identify with, develop a plan of action, and then implement things practically, write a journal, invite each other to your classrooms for peer observation, and then, of course, evaluate and adapt. This would be an ideal sort of long-term objective, a planning objective for a whole school, if you're a coordinator, for example. And now let's have a look at very practical implementations. What can you do in your lessons? Well, the first one is retrieval practice at the beginning of every lesson. We tend to say, and I've said this myself, I guess, many times, and I've heard teachers say it many times, I wish I had more lessons. I don't have enough time. And we will never have enough time. And believe me, I've worked with teachers from schools who have 12 hours of English a week. And guess what they were complaining about? I don't have enough time for all the things I would like to do. Still, donate a few minutes at the beginning of the class to a think, pair, and share activity. Set a challenging retrieval task at the beginning of a lesson. For example, write down 6 interesting words that you learned in the last lesson. You do it immediately, individually first, pair up with another student. So think, pair, and then when you've compared your findings, let's share them in class. Doesn't take long, but you are actually engaging them in thinking hard and in part of a retrieval cycle. Revisit texts and activities to harvest language, for example, lexical chunks, collocations. We often, when we've done quote unquote a text, it's done and dusted. Okay, let's go back to texts. Let's pick out interesting collocations, lexical chunks, etc., etc. This is one of my favorite examples. This is what I call a chunk generator, a collocations generator. Once a time, there was a man and his son. So it's not a gap text. I've told them a story. This is what I'm doing afterwards. But rather than giving them a gap text, they have to fill in, they have to say the sentence, and they have to put the word in at the correct place. Once upon a time, there was a man and his son. They apologized him and congratulated him. They apologized to him, etc., etc., etc. This involves a lot more thinking, okay? We'll skip point number 3, that takes too much time. Engage students in buddy testing. They test each other. For example, you have a new lexical set. They test each other on the new lexical set. And self-testing. We will look at a number of examples, okay? The buddy learning system, what I do there is I create long-term pairs of learners, learning buddies. They meet up independently, for example, on WhatsApp, on phone, on FaceTime, Zoom, whatever they have available, and they practice certain things with each other. It's part of their homework. I set them retrieval practice tasks. I give them quizzes, etc., which they have to do, or they can later also develop such tasks, quizzes, worksheets for another pair, okay? Occasionally, I ask them if I can join them. So it's all, of course, on a voluntary basis, but I really make sure that learners engage themselves in this, okay? And of course, we need to use that. We can use that to develop metacognition. In other words, lovely, Lucas. Thank you so much for saying you've used this one this week. I hope it's a comment on the buddy learning system, or maybe this was a comment on the previous thing. I didn't actually see when exactly your comment came in. Okay, and of course we need to scaffold their learning. We need to give them support if and when necessary. Let's have a look at a unit from Think, the second edition of Think. This is level 2, so B1. And it's a beautiful first spread, isn't it? No Planet B, serious topic. There's lots of course, also fun topics. This one, of course, is a very serious topic. So I'm just giving you the frame here. So we open up with these photographs and with a video. And the video, I don't have the video here now. I'm not playing it for time reasons, but it's a video that makes students think of how much plastic they use, maybe. And you can see this sad photograph of lots of plastic waste in I guess the sea somewhere, okay, and here on a beach, okay, and they read these texts here. Then on the next page we have the first grammar topic. This is will, may, might for prediction. Functional speaking, expressing surprise, expressing enthusiasm, vocabulary, the environment. Then we progress further. Here comes the first thinking point. 4 short pieces of texts, and students are supposed to read them. And then they're supposed to match them with different text types. It's very important for students to be familiar with text types, because knowing what kind of text type I am dealing with is something that helps making connections, that helps with search processes, etc., etc. Then a reading text, and then the second grammar area. And this is where I would now like to quickly go into. I would like to play this grammar rap. We have a grammar rap in every unit from starter to level 6 to the C1 level. And in addition to the rhythm and the rapper's voice, we also have some visualization. I hope you like this. Let me just, oops, here we go.
Okay. If you make some small changes, yes, you help us to repair some environmental problems. Yes. So listen if you care. Of course. Yeah. If you keep your shopping bags, instead of throwing them away, you won't need any new ones for your shopping the next day. Woo! If a tap drips in your bathroom, it will cause a lot of waste. So make sure they all work well. And if they don't, get them replaced. Let's go. If you give unwanted gadgets, yes, to a local charity, okay, they will find someone who needs them, and they will use them happily. Yes.
We use
Herbert, you are on mute.
Thank you, Leo. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay. Now we can see when we go back here to this page where the wrap is. You have, of course, as you should have, various grammar activities. What I'm trying to suggest also, and this is, of course, especially easily possible if students are using the digital version also, then they could do an activity not just once, but several times. So they can almost do it like a practice test activity. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is that good activities should not just be done once, they should actually be done 2 or 3 times. And if you help students to understand that, they will see how they get into a flow, how they remember important language a lot more easily. Now, after this culture page here, we come to the practice test for preliminary for schools, and then the unit test here. Okay, so test yourself. Now, if students don't have the internet available on Cambridge One, there are a lot of such activities that they can do several times and not just once. But even if they only had, let's say, the paper in front of them, they could actually, you could teach them to not fill in the gaps here as far as these practice tests are concerned, but just write them on a piece of paper, write the number and the missing word, and also here with the grammar, so they could then check and tomorrow or 2 days later, what have you, they could do the same thing again. And you will notice, they will notice how fast their learning actually progresses. Much, much, much faster than if they sit down and highlight these texts, study them 100 times, what have you. And we're not talking about wishful thinking here. We're talking about research-based learning. There is hard scientific evidence that this kind of learning through practice testing is actually just much, much faster. So all these activities can be done in this way, okay? Students are normally not good at judging the efficacy of their learning, so we need to sell them retrieval practice as the solution to their learning problems, okay? Remember, learning happens when people have to think hard. Here's a few suggestions for reading, if anybody is interested in reading a bit about some findings from the new science of learning. I'd like to thank you, and I'm giving back to Katja.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Herbert. We do have a question here. I don't have the participant's name, but the question is, could I say to students that whenever they have a great night of sleep, they will have their memories of the day consolidated at a more proficient and efficient way?
Absolutely. So lack of sleep, and that is, again, something that is a clear outcome of several of these studies. Lack of sleep actually has a negative impact on memory. It has a negative impact, of course, also on concentration. Students can't pay attention so well. If they want to particularly, to really profit from these insights into the importance of sleep, then of course the other side of the coin is retrieval practice. In other words, studying things with the help of practice tests, and doing it not just once, but doing the same kind of test several times. Ideally, of course, also online, because that's the easiest way of doing those things. And this question has gone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Herbert, for all the information, valuable information you brought us this afternoon. Thanks very much again for accepting our invitation. We know you are very miles away from us, already in the evening of Friday, so we really value your time here. Thanks a lot. You have in the chat box the link for feedback and your certificate.
Well, thanks so much, Katja. Thank you, everybody, for taking part. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope to see you again one day in Brazil.
Yes, sure. We are looking forward to that. Thanks very much once again. Enjoy your weekend. See